So we're continuing in the book of Ruth, verse by verse, and we're all the way up to verse 9, and I've called this the Lord granting. Last week we saw Naomi's desire to show kindness, God's kindness to Orpah and Ruth. This was a kind of, she wanted a general blessing. But this week, we're going to see the specific blessing. What is the specific blessing that she wants for these two ladies? In verse 9. Rest. She wants husbands for them. She wants husbands for them. Rest. The Lord grant that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. She has the specific request that they get husbands, and I'll talk about that. Now, I want to read you, I believe this man is Nigerian, David Oyebola. And if Owens was here, he could tell me what kind of name that is. But he says this: these verses also introduce us to the author's characteristic use of dialogue. Over 50 out of his total 85 verses in the book are taken up with dialogue. It is therefore obvious that he prefers to tell the story through conversations. The location of this dialogue is not specified, but it is most likely took place at some distance down the road from Moab to Judah. Alternatively, the conversation may have taken place at the border between Moab and Judah, thus enhancing its dramatic role as a turning point in the story. So as I said last week, verse 8 starts dialogue back and forth. Ruth with, Naomi with her daughter-in-laws, and then Naomi with Ruth, and then Ruth talking to Boaz, and Boaz talking to Ruth. And so God tells this story through these dialogues. And now, verse 9 is actually a prayer. It's her prayer request. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Now, she said, the house of your husband, where is that going to be? In what land?
In Israel.
No, not in Israel. Because in verse 8, she says, go return each to your mother's house. Where are their mother's houses? Moab. She's saying, go and marry a Moabitish man. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing.
Bad thing. Bad thing. They worshipped false gods. And this is very important. So she's wanting God's blessing, and the blessing of the Lord is a wonderful thing. And she wants God's blessing on their lives. And I said there's two things that we really have to understand about this. And I covered it last week. And we have to understand, how can we understand, there's two main things that help us to understand Naomi's point of view. First of all, she was a backslider. So she's going to give her point of view from a backslidden person. Second of all, what was the other thing? Every man did right which is in her own eyes. So she didn't consider about what does God say about this matter. She thought about it from her point of view. So what was her point of view? It was a backslidden point of view. So how could she say to her daughter-in-laws, go back to Moab and marry heathen? Because she was a backslider. She was away from God, and we know that. And again, I told you, I read a lot of commentaries. I probably read more than 20 commentaries. I put more time in preparing for the book of Ruth than I do actually the Sunday morning sermon. But many of the commentaries talk about how she's a great woman of faith at this time. No, she's not. Why is she going back to the land of Israel? Because she's heard there's bread. Not because she wants to worship God, not because she's away from God, not because it's where she's supposed to give her offerings and her sacrifices, but for a physical reason. Does that make her spiritual? No. Doing things for a physical reason, even if it's the right thing, doesn't make it spiritual. So she was doing the right thing and going back to Israel, yes?
Yes.
But for the wrong reason. The reason wasn't to get right with God, it was for bread. But having said that, she still believes in God. The Lord grant you that you may find rest. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Jehovah. She believed in God. She talked about him, but she didn't trust in him. She didn't trust that God could give her daughter-in-laws men of God as husbands. She said, go back to the world and find a husband in the world. Not a very good advice, is it? It's bad advice. She didn't have the faith to believe that God could work it all out. But she believed in God, and she didn't believe in false gods. But at this point, it's more of a head knowledge than a heart knowledge. She knows that God could do it. And I see a contradiction here. The Lord grant you that you might find rest in each of you in the house of your husband. Your husband back where I'm sending you back into Moab, where they worship false gods, but God give you rest. Do you see the hypocrisy in that? And you know what? That's a backslider. A backslider can talk the right talk, but not do the right thing. But she does realize one thing. It's all of God's grace. The Lord grant you. Not that you deserve it, but it's the grace of God. Well, may the grace of God look after you. And so this is her prayer. She realizes blessings come from God. Look at James chapter 1. While you're turning to James chapter 1, I'm going to read Proverbs 10. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, he addeth no sorrow with it. James chapter 1, verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. She realized that blessings come from God. And she realizes she's been away from God, and she hasn't had the blessings of God. And she talks about that later in the chapter, in verse 20 and 21 of Ruth 1. And she said, and call me not Naomi. What does Naomi mean?
Mara.
What did you think?
Bitterness.
No, Mara is bitter.
Sweetness.
Sweetness. So, pleasantness. Don't call me pleasantness, call me Mara. And Mara is what? Bitterness. Why? For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. She realizes she's been away from God. And God has been using chastisement to bring her back. And whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. His ultimate desire is people get right with him. So, she is saved, but away from God. And so her counsel is not what it should be. She didn't believe, really what she should want. She should say, okay, my daughters-in-laws have married men of Israel, so now other men in Israel could marry them, and so I want a godly husband for them. That's what she should have wanted, isn't it? She didn't want a godly husband. She just wanted a husband that would be able to look after her. And that, very poor counsel. And so, to me, I said it seems strange. She's wanting God to bless her and daughter-in-laws, but not wanting them to, daughter-in-laws, to live for God or to know God. But that is the way a blackslider works. They're concerned about the physical blessings. And I suppose she didn't believe that God could give them godly husbands in Israel. But he did, didn't he? Ruth got a wonderful husband, Boaz. So God did what she judged impossible. Now, what does she want? She wants them to have an easier life than they've had. They've lost their husband. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That they would have, she would have rest with her husband. That's a good thing, isn't it? But the way she figured it was going to happen is the Ruth and Orpah would go back to Moab and find Moabitess husbands that were going to treat them right. So she wanted a good thing, but she says, let's do it the wrong way. Now, rest doesn't mean they just sat around and did nothing. It means free from troubles and anxieties, and she said, God hath dealt very bitterly with me. It's free from all those things. Let me read you James Hastings' Dictionary of the Bible. I may be wrong, but I think Hastings might have been Irish, but I'm not sure of this. Rest. The conception of rest as a gift from God runs through the Bible. The underlying idea being not idleness, but freedom from anxiety, which is the condition of an effective work. It is promised to Israel in the land of Canaan, Zion, the resting place of God, the temple built by the man of rest. So, we have to understand, Ruth happened in the time of Judges. What was it like in that time? The heathen lands. What was it like for a woman? It wasn't great. Sadly, for most places, women were treated very badly. So the book of Ruth happened around 1325 BC. That's 1,325 years before Christ. And it was not a woman's world. It was a man's world. And as widows, they had nothing to look forward to. And so that's why she wants them to find rest. Poole said, a quiet, happy life, free from the cares, vexations, encumbrances, and troubles which widows are in a special manner exposed to. And so the result of rest would be by God's grace. And by the way, you're never going to have rest away from God if you're a Christian. Did Naomi have rest in Moab? No. Not at all. God hath dealt very bitterly with me. She realizes away from God, there is no rest. And yet she says to her daughter-in-laws, go back to your false gods. Go back to Moab. Go back to live in a heathen land. Again, a backslider's counsel. Bible says in Isaiah 57 verse 21, there is no peace, saith my Lord, my God, to the wicked. Psalm 38 verse 3, there is no soundness in my flesh because of thine anger, neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. So there's no real rest when you're away from God. So Naomi is more interested in these girls' physical than their spiritual. She says, well, I really want you to get married because it's difficult for a widow woman. But what about their souls? What about their walk with God? What about their eternity? Wouldn't you think she should be more concerned about that? But backsliders put the temporal over the eternal. What's temporal?
Things that we can see, touch.
Yep. Things that are temporary. And then the physical over the spiritual. So the backslider puts the body over the soul. Let me read you this from Geneva Bible footnotes. By this it appears that Naomi, by dwelling among idolaters, had become cold to the true zeal of God, having more respect for the comfort of the body than the comfort of the soul. So she's concerned about these women physically, but not spiritually. That's quite sad, isn't it? But it is a reflection of Naomi, because that's the way she was at this time. She is not a great woman of faith at this time, contrary to many commentators. Now, thankfully, there are also many that realize that she's away from God, because she goes away, and we'll see later, she's just a bitter woman. So she asks for that God would bless. The Lord grant ye that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. She wants them married. And marriage, the Bible says, is honorable. And the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. God blesses marriage. God designed marriage. God designed marriage. God designed human government. And God designed the local church. Each one for a purpose. And it's not good for a man to be alone. And God made and helped me. It was wonderful. Marriage is a wonderful thing. But you want to marry a godly person. And too many people are satisfied and they marry somebody because of the physical. Okay, she's beautiful or he's handsome. That's not a reason to marry somebody. Very soon after the marriage, people that have married for the physical looks find out that really is not that important. So anyways, it's a terrible thing. I want to read you a quote from Gill. That they might each of them be blessed with good husband, with whom they might live free from brawls and contentions, as well as from distressing cares of life, having husbands to provide all things necessary for them, and from all the sorrows and distresses of widowhood estate. So she wants them to be blessed physically. The pulpit commentary says, young females in Moab had little scope of life, of usefulness and happiness, unless shielded round and round within a home of pure and devoted husband. And by the way, these heathen places did not treat their wives very good either. And let me read you one last quote. This is from Lang. And he says, the position of a single woman in antiquity was an unhappy one. It was altogether customary for youthful widows to marry again. Only a husband's house was the true asylum for a woman. There she finds protection, safety, and honor. And that's exactly what Naomi wants. She wants protection for her daughter-in-laws. It wasn't going to be an easy life to be a single woman, a single widowed woman. Not everybody wants to marry one. And so, yes, she has the right desire, but she's doing it the wrong way. It's never right to do wrong, no matter what your motive is. So I want to give everyone here 1,000 euros. And I say, okay, I want to give everyone 1,000 euros. And I go rob a shop. And I give you 1,000 euros. Was it right for me to rob the shop? No. Was it a good motive to want to give you money? Sure, it might be nice to be a blessing to you. Who could use 1,000 euros? Everybody. We can all use 1,000 euros. But it's never right to do wrong, no matter what the motive. And so she has a good motive towards her daughter-in-laws. She wants them to be happy. Is it good for a mother-in-law to want her daughter-in-law happy? Yes. as I said, this is a very strange relationship because most time, a lot of times, there is a stress between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. But both daughter-in-laws seem to love Naomi, and Naomi seems to love both Orpah and Ruth. And she wants the physical blessing, and she wants God to bless them, but she doesn't want them to do it in the right way. And again, that is the way somebody that's away from God thinks. They're not going to think according to what God says. They're going to do what is right in their own eyes. So Naomi looks at the situation. She comes up with a plan. But the problem is, she left God out of the plan, didn't she? So her ways are not God's ways. And we need to be very careful till we understand that a backslider, their ways are not God's ways. And so many people listen to backsliders. A backslider will often be willing to give you spiritual advice. I don't know why that is, but they seem to be willing to do that. And Naomi's advice is not good, and we're going to see again, she says, like, to see her spiritual condition, verse 15, you have to understand this. And she said, "Behold, thy sister-in-law has gone back unto her people and to her gods. Return thou after her sister-in-law, thy sister-in-law." Go back to false gods. An amazing thing, isn't it? So this is this counsel that she's giving to her daughter-in-laws is from somebody far away from God. So just because somebody says they're a Christian and outwardly look at their life, and if their life's not walking with God, don't listen to their counsel, because their counsel is going to be according to their own thoughts, not according to the Word of God. And so we'll see this more in the coming weeks. So verse 9, "Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept." Well, we understand what kiss is for. It's a token of affection, and she certainly seems to have a heart for these women. She wants a blessing them, but she has a heart for them. But being away from God, she's not able to give them good advice. And so, even though she has a heart for them, it's not going to do them any good. "And they lifted up their voice and wept." Now, I think "they" refers back to the daughter-in-laws. She kissed them, and them is the daughter-in-laws, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So I think that's the daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah. Now, it may be all three, I don't know. But it's showing a deep sorrow. This weeping, it's not a fake thing. They're upset. It's like Esau when he didn't get the blessing in Genesis 27. "And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father." I mean, this is a sorrowful thing, because they think they'll never see each other again. When Naomi is going back to Israel, she's going back permanently, and she's sending them back to Moab. So it can be very, very upsetting. In 1 Samuel 30, "Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep." So this is a sad thing. And next week we're going to see they tell her, "No, we're going to continue on with you." But sadly, only one does. So it helps us to have an understanding what's going on here. And so we'll stop there, and next week we'll continue on in Ruth. Let's close in a word of prayer.